Hello, all of my history-loving friends. Welcome to the world of Madam Morbid, where we talk about weird historical events. If you like what you see, please like the video, please subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss any awesome historical topics. Today we are talking about the fall of the Baldknobbers. In particular, we are talking about the botched execution of 3 convicted murderers of the Edens and Green killing. If you have not seen the episode previous to this one, you need to go back and watch the episode that is about the murder, and then come back and watch this one to learn about the trials and execution of those responsible. Let's get started. This murder enrages the people of Christian County. They already hate the Baldknobbers. There's already been an effort to try to crack down on them because of their efforts against homesteaders. But after this murder, they want them gone. Sheriff Zachariah Johnson was in charge of the investigation. He assembled a posse, and he went in search of several men that the surviving widows had identified as who they thought was there. When they caught and arrested Joe Inman, that is when they got their big break, because he broke down and began naming names. He confessed to having been there, and it's from there that Johnson was able to apprehend those who had taken part in this murder. Soon he had 19 men in custody, including Dave Walker, John Matthews, Wiley Matthews, and within a week he had rounded up nearly everybody suspected of taking part in this. The only one he did not have was William Walker. William had been wounded in the leg. He had been hidden away in Douglas County with Dave Walker's brother so that he could hide and recuperate. Sheriff Johnson would find out where he was, and he would come up with a plan to lure William out so that he could capture him. William Newton was a Baldknobber arrested for the murder. He had a sister, Lois, who was William Walker's girlfriend, possibly fiancée. They had another brother, Joseph Newton, who was also a Baldknobber, but had not been arrested for anything. And he wanted to protect William, who had been arrested, and use Lois as bait to draw out William Walker. Joe went to David Walker, told him he wanted to help William escape, so Dave volunteered William's location. In the meantime, he told William, his brother who was arrested, to help the authorities, to give up anyone he could to save his own life, and William listened to his advice. Using the women as bait and convincing William that he was helping him escape when actually he was getting him captured, he lured him to a train station, convincing him that he was going to be taking a train to Arkansas, when in fact, when they got to the train station, the sheriff was waiting for him. I was here a few days ago on the town square here in Ozark, and I did not know the original spot of the jail where it was. I was assuming it was across the street, but it actually was right on the square. This is the old courthouse, and the jail was built basically right where I am standing. You see the monument, and the jail was right here. It wasn't across the street. It was built right by this area right here, and it was built specifically to house the Baldknobbers. It wasn't built to last. They had so many people in jail that were Baldknobbers, they had to build a whole new building to house them. Even so, even though it wasn't built very well and it wasn't built to last, it was here until 1929 when it was finally torn down. And I'm going to share a photo with you that was taken from one of the upper stories of this building, and it was in the 70s, and you could still see the outline of the jail in the ground. It was like a shadow of where the building once stood. The gallows were right next to that jail, and they may have been close to where this marker is. I don't know that for sure though. I just know that the jail was located right here and that the gallows were built right next to it. Based on the dimensions I saw from the 1973 photograph, I feel like they were probably right in here, right where this monument stands. This cell door was used in the jail that housed these guys before they were executed. And the jail was torn down in 1929, and the doors were moved to the 3rd floor of the courthouse where they stayed until 2019, when they did some work on the courthouse, and one of the doors was given to this museum, and this is it. So I don't think the guys were in a cell. Maybe they were 2 and 2 in a cell. I think William might have been in a cell with his dad. Locals were terrified that the free bald knobbers were going to try to break out, the ones that were still in the jail. And there was a lot of paranoia to an extent. One night, a wedding party caused absolute panic because everyone heard them whooping and they were firing their guns in the air, and they thought it was the bald knobbers coming to break these guys out. But really, it was just this couple getting married and their family having fun and making a lot of noise and firing their guns. But that's how on edge everybody was during this period. A lot of these guys in Christian County were extremely poor. They didn't have money for lawyers. And so the guys that were up for murder charges, they did get the trials pushed back a couple of times so that they could come up with the money for their counsel. Some of the attorneys represented them for free, and some of them were really big names in law around here. This is not where the trials took place. The old courthouse burned down. They tend to do that around here. So this one right here, even though it's somewhat of an old building, it is not the one where they had the trials. These trials went on for some time because they were not only trying the guys for this murder, they were also trying them for unlawful assembly. They were trying them for people that they had dragged out of bed at night and beaten. They were being tried for homesteaders that they had run off. They were being tried for just so many of these crimes and assaults. It all kind of ended with the murder trials. And a lot of the same witnesses were used in each and every trial for each individual. Some were acquitted of the murder, but they stood trial for some of these other crimes as well. And then they were also used as witnesses against the other guys on trial for the murder. Eventually, 4 of them were sentenced to hang, and it was Dave Walker, William Walker, Wiley Matthews, and John Matthews. They did appeal. It went all the way to the Missouri Supreme Court, and they all lost their appeals. They were trying to save Dave Walker because he wasn't there, and ultimately it was decided that he was the head of the organization. He should have done more to stop it. So therefore, he was just as guilty as everyone else. Now you're probably wondering, I said 4 guys were supposed to be hanged. Well, this is true, but Wiley and his father, John, managed to escape. And the way they escaped was actually really elaborate. They made a key. They managed to somehow get the key and make a copy of it. John Matthews was a gifted woodworker, and they allowed him to have wood and tools for him to work on his making canes. He was making canes to help support his family. He used these tools and the wood he had for making these canes to make a copy of this key. They made a mold of the key. He hollowed it out, made a mold of the key, And then they gave him lead, supposedly to help make the heads for these canes he's making. And he uses the lead instead to melt it down and make this key. He and Wiley get away. Unfortunately, because John was so old, well, he wasn't that old, but he'd been in jail a long time. He was an older guy, and he didn't have the stamina that he had before. They also escaped during winter. And by the time he was caught, he was basically desperate and freezing and starving to death. And people caught him, and then they took him back to the authorities, and he was put back in jail. So he ended up hanging as well, but Wiley was never captured. He had planned originally to hire a professional executioner from Kansas City, and Dave Walker begged the sheriff, "I don't want to be killed by a stranger. I want you to do this." And the sheriff had never done this before, and it was a really big mistake for him to go ahead and do this, because this execution went horribly wrong. Horribly wrong. After their conviction and the failure of a series of appeals, also after the escape of Wiley Matthews and John Matthews and his subsequent recapture, execution day arrived. The night before, the three men who were to die had a small religious service held inside the jail. Minister T.B. Horn held this service for them. William Walker asked to be baptized, and so a bathtub was brought for him, and Reverend Horn baptized him. Dave and William seemed pretty composed, but John Matthews was having a really hard time with it. He was awake most of the night before. He was praying. He was singing hymns. He talked to the guard on duty. He said several times that he was innocent. I wonder if he really went in the cabin, or if he didn't, or maybe he went in the cabin but didn't do anything. I don't know. But he said he didn't deserve to be hanged. He did fall asleep shortly before dawn, finally, and the other men didn't have the heart to wake him until it was absolutely necessary to do so. Their lawyer, T.J. Delaney, paid them a final visit that morning. They thanked him for everything he had done, for trying so hard. They had their last meal. They are said to have heartily eaten that meal, and John Matthews even asked for seconds of coffee. An hour after that, they had another religious exercise. 3 ministers came to them. They were going to witness the execution. They prayed with them. They sang several hymns with them. A boy living nearby recalled hearing them sing "Nearer, My God, to Thee," "Home Sweet Home," and "In the Sweet By and By," that he could hear wafting out the windows of the jail. At 9:30, the sheriff and 2 deputies took them where they were to be executed. The crowd was kept from viewing anything. They had built a very tall fence. Only a small group, the jurors, 3 ministers, 3 doctors, and a few journalists, were allowed to witness the event. They were allowed to say some last words. The Walkers didn't say much. They said they were innocent, but that they were ready to die. John Matthews talked and rambled for a while, proclaiming he was innocent, saying how much he felt for his poor wife and children who are losing a father. And he started to talk again after they put the noose around his neck, asking journalists to not say bad things about them. He made a comment that they would be taking their dinners in hell today. He begged witnesses to support his wife and children after he died. Dave and William kissed each other just before the hoods were put on them. After the hood was put on John Matthews' head, he yelled out a farewell to everybody. At 9:54, the sheriff opened the door, and the men fell. John Matthews' neck broke on the first drop, but what happened to the Walkers was absolutely horrible. The rope around Dave Walker's neck was too long, and he was dangling with his feet touching the ground, and he was trying to pull himself up. William Walker's rope came undone, and he landed on his knees and his face. He was bleeding. He was spitting out blood into his hood. He was left there for a moment while they went and dealt with Dave, who was touching the ground. They were trying to readjust the rope. They ended up having to basically rehang him. So they got Dave Walker done, and then they came back to do the same thing to William. Well, this time, The noose slipped entirely off of his head, and he fell to the ground on his face. At this point, he is groaning. He's begging God, please end my suffering. So the sheriff, they grab him again. They hoist him through the trap door. They sit him on the scaffold, and they let him sit there until the doctor declares his father and John Matthews dead. And at 10:16, they lift him back up, they retie the rope, and they hang him again. Again, his neck doesn't break when he drops. And for the next 16 minutes, an agonizingly long time, he strangles to death. He's lowered, and he and his father are placed in walnut coffins encased in pine boxes. We're headed to Sparta. We're going to go to the graves of the Walkers. They had a lot of trouble finding somewhere that would accept their bodies. Most bald knobbers fought for the Union in the Civil War. The majority. There were a few Confederate veterans. So they were members of the Grand Army of the Republic, the GAR. Initially, the GAR said they would help bear the cost of burying Dave and William. But because the reputation of the bald knobbers was so bad, they pulled out at the last minute and said they weren't going to. Which meant his family had no way to bury them. They ended up burying them in a small cemetery behind the Baptist church in Sparta, and that's where we're headed now. So there used to be a church here. I'm guessing this area right here where there's people living, there must have been a church, because it said he was buried behind the Baptist church. And they've just developed all around this cemetery. But these are the Walkers, and they died horrible deaths, guys. William did something terrible, but the way he died was not okay, in my opinion. If you're gonna execute somebody, then you've gotta do it right. One of the newspapers described the funeral of David and William Walker. The caskets were opened before they were put into the ground. A very small number of people attended, mostly family, and apparently the damage to the two bodies was significant, especially William. He had landed on his face. He was literally covered in blood and was basically, they said he was unrecognizable almost as from the handsome man that he had been. His father had severe damage to his neck and jaw. His eyes were open, and there was just this look of horror on his face. They were buried in one plot, their coffins laid side by side. And they didn't get this stone. William didn't have a stone at all until 1990. One was put up by the GAR for David several years after he died. For a long time, all they had were two wooden planks with their names scribbled on it. So they do have something more appropriate now for both of them. I'm here at the grave of John Matthews. He was buried on his farm in a family plot. Of all of them, John Matthews was the lucky one in that his execution wasn't botched. It went the way it was supposed to be, and he died pretty immediately. This cemetery is out in the middle of nowhere. I am going to assume this really isn't accessible to the public. And I don't know who these other graves are for. There really isn't any writing left on them. But it's got to be members of his family, I would think. His son Wiley did escape, and it is believed he returned home around 1930. He showed up, a strange man. He claimed that he was a mineral man who was looking into minerals in this area. But no one ever saw him doing anything like that, and he kept to back roads. He was mainly here to see his sister, and I wonder if she's buried in one of these graves here. He is rumored to have lived out his life in Arkansas. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been kind of a sad one. I've heard about the bald knobbers since I was a little kid. I've been riding Fire in the Hole since, well, as long as I can remember, and was tall enough to ride a ride. It's a ride at Silver Dollar City. You get on the train in a fire station. The concept of the ride is that it's a fireman situation and you got to put out the fires that the bald knobbers have set in this town. You're driving through a town that's being burned down by the bald knobbers. I have not been able to find any event in which that actually happened. It starts out, it's just a quiet night. You hear the bugs and the frogs, and you come around this curve and you see this house and it's completely in flames, and there's this man with his rear end hanging out of the upper story window, and his wife's yelling at him. I forget his name, something like, "Herbert, you get back in here and put on some pants." And he makes a comment, "I ain't got pants no more. The darn bald knobbers stole them." And so you go around that, and there's this flaming bridge, which I always thought was so cool. You see the bridge from afar, and that the fire is made with orange and yellow fabric that they're blowing a fan on that's making it move and look like it's burning. That you go across the burning bridge, and ahead of you there's a light that's just doing this, you know, and you hear the sound of a train. So it's supposed to look like you're going straight into a train, and just as you're going to hit the train, you go down a dip into some water, so you get a little bit of a splash. It's not much of a water ride. And as you go down the dip, it goes, "Fire in the hole." This ride's been there since the 60s, 70s. It was definitely there when I was a little kid growing up in the 80s. And, you know, they have all the mannequins and the bald knobbers standing around with their scary masks on. And that's how I knew bald knobbers existed. But that's how the bald knobbers have come to be remembered, as a menace. You know, burning people's homes, terrorizing the neighborhood. And that's not what they were founded for, but it's how they came to be viewed, and it's how they have been remembered. And they ended up just terrorizing people. And we have learned today how it ended. This is how the bald knobbers went away, and it was in a terrible way.